Can you get the text message out? What did I even say to you? What did I say to you?
Yeah, Andrew came to us and he's like, dude, I don't know if Chris is saved.
He said he hates the gospel. I guarantee that's probably how it came off.
I just have a way different view on what the gospel is.
No. We start. You can't just go right to that. Wow.
That's what I heard.
You're gonna weaponize my words immediately. Let's get this recorded. So.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Friend of Sinners. Today, I just want to hit 3 questions. What is your story? Do the events in your story or in your life still have an effect on you? And do you enjoy sharing what makes you uniquely you? So today, we've got our first guest today, Chris. We have the other 2
guys.
sinners.
Those guys.
Jonathan and Joshua. And I'm your host, Andrew. Yeah, so last week we shared a little bit about the stories of our lives and things that kind of shape us. So I think it's a good opportunity to bring in someone who's new, someone with a little different story. And we just kind of want to get a little more into the detail of a little bit of our lives. And I think it's something we should be doing more of as we kind of learn more about each other. So, Chris, introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Chris Lorenz. Don't know how far back in the story you want to go, but
Way back.
Way back. Yeah, so I am 41 years old. I am married for 16 years to an amazing wife that has put up with me, Ashley. 3 kids, 12-year-old boy and 10 and 8-year-old girl. So that's where I'm at now. But yeah, how far back in the story do you want to go?
Let's I guess.
Where are you from?
That's a good question. I grew up on the east coast of Florida in West Palm Beach. And so I'm kind of the last of a dying breed of Florida natives, some 5th generation Floridian. So my dad and my great-great-grandparents and all them were from like a little bit northern Florida. But yeah, grew up in
Wait,
West
so you
Palm.
were born in Florida?
Yes, sir.
I remember I just had this conversation with someone. I'm like, I only know 3 people in my entire time in Florida that have been born here. Now it's 4.
Now it's 4. There you go. Congratulations.
There's not a lot of natives here for sure. If someone were to come up to you, Chris, what's your story? Like what, maybe where did you start off in your younger life? Middle school, high school?
I would say, if you're going to do your typical like testimony story, I grew up in a Christian home. My mom and dad, they both helped out with the youth at our church. And it was like a small Presbyterian church over on the East Coast. And so I grew up just surrounded with the Word. We were always in church doing that. So I'd say like I accepted Christ at a young age. I don't have like the remembering like, oh, here's like the day that it was. Yeah. I know that was a huge deal back in the 90s. Like write it on the beginning of your Bible. Yeah. The 1900s. So, but yeah, and then like it felt like every summer, middle school camp or high school camp or whatever it was, I like rededicated my life to Christ, and like that was a huge thing. And the purity culture, which I don't know how much you guys even know of that, but that was the thing. So
do you want to go over it, just a brief, what is it?
Yeah, no sex till marriage.
Right.
Don't even think about it.
No conversation around it.
Yeah. No premarital hand-holding.
No, like save yourself for marriage, like period. There was no, and don't talk about it. Like that's just it. And so there was just this whole thing. There was a whole thing called straight edge as well back then. There you go. Yeah, why don't you talk about that? What is I wasn't. So
straight edge is like a whole subculture within like the punk rock hardcore scene of skateboarding and stuff, but it was like we're gonna get X's tattooed on our hands, and we will never talk about do drugs, alcohol, anything. I don't do alcohol.
I don't do alcohol. He's really good at it.
But they were like, I don't know, it was cool. I was kind of a part of that subculture for sure.
Where's your tattoo?
Of like, well,
smart.
He wears
it's
makeup
washed
over
off.
now.
Yeah.
No, that's what they would do too. Is like if they were straight edge and then like they would like they messed up or something, But were you part of that?
No.
You just knew of it.
Yeah, I knew of it.
You made fun of us.
Yeah.
Look at you, losers.
It was, I don't know, like I don't know where I stood on it. I guess I didn't find out about it until I wasn't cool enough to know about it. Yeah. And then I was like, oh wow, that's what those guys are doing. And it felt like it was if like drugs and alcohol were cool, like we're gonna be cool for not doing them. And I actually had respect for it. Like, it was like, oh, you know,
it was cool.
Yeah, and I think everyone that grew up in church culture had, I don't know, I'll say like there's a lot of not legalism, but there was a lot of like, where's your line in the sand? Like, what is okay to do and not do, and everything else like that. And so, I would say 18 to 22-ish age for me was a big season of figuring out how much of my mommy and daddy's like religion do I actually agree with, and how much of it am I going to incorporate. And so that was like how do I feel? Like, I'm 21 now. How do I feel about, you know, alcohol? Like, what does the Bible say about it? Where do I stand on it? And so there was a lot of like digging into why maybe my parents made the decisions they made, some of the people in my community made the decisions, and then figuring out what is right for me and what does the Bible say about that. So
Yeah. No,
that season. That season was transformational for me, because I would say that's the beginning of my following of Jesus, because I didn't really have a choice growing up.
Yeah.
And then at that point, it was like, okay, I got baptized at like 22 or something like that, 2003.
Yeah, that's one of like the big things about like in my testimony is like once I hit about 17, 18, and then it became like my decision. It's like it's no longer what your parents pressed upon you. It's no longer what you're taught, but it's like, what do I want to do, or what do I believe?
Right.
And that's where I kind of fell off the boat and went the other direction. But I think that's where like you have the opportunity to grow, because like that's when it becomes yours. Like you know, what you believe, what you share, or what you value. And I think that's just so interesting. Like it's just interesting when I hear people share the same thing, like around 17, 18, or 19. That's when whether they start to believe in Jesus on their own, or whether they go on some other way. So I think that's a pretty cool, like, interesting pivotal point or area in people's
Is that
lives.
when you say like you came to Christ legitimately, or?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm at a point now, like where I'm at, like that's what we kind of like alluded to. We probably will talk about later, but I don't know, because I technically I came to him earlier. I just didn't really know what I was doing, I would say. And it wasn't until then I could actually consciously make more decisions that affected my trajectory that were not involved with someone else, like my parents.
Yeah.
doing that. So
Would you say it was forced on you, or just strongly suggested and put you in environments of it?
if you grew up in a family that is, you know, Bucks fans, it's kind of hard not to be a Bucks fan if you're going to the games every, like this, you grow up in that culture. Would you say that you are forced to be a Bucks fan? Like, no, you're not forced to be a Bucks fan, but that's what you know. That's what your family does. That's what your tribe does. And so there's not really any other choices or options out there. So yeah, like I read, like, you know, some what do actual Hindu, like Buddhist, like the Quran, like what are these other things that I've never actually been exposed to, and then almost to make sure that my parents had make the test the water basically. And I don't know how you guys feel about it, but like I encourage that, because if your faith can't withstand other faiths that you never even heard about, then like it's pretty blind.
I think we were just talking about that on Saturday. Like, Christianity should be like the religion you can question, because we have the truth, we have the answers for it, and we may not have all the answers.
Well, so does every other religion. They all have the truth too.
Not everyone. A lot of, like, I grew up in Wyoming, and a lot of it is Mormon mostly, and they would, from my understanding, they were saying like, no, you're not supposed to really ask questions. You're just like, this is what you believe, this is what you do.
Right.
Go do it. And like, there were things that I believe they couldn't answer because it was not truth.
Yeah.
But I think that's what turns off so many people, like, when they grow up, is because they never could question, they never could quite certainly trust why they believe in this. So I think with Christianity, like, if you really believe in it, you should not be afraid to test it, you know, like maybe either ask questions, or like whether if you want to read some other types of like literature or some other types of religions, just so like you got an idea of like, okay, this is what the options are, but which one is the most sure? Which one can I test?
And I think that's what is difficult about Christianity, is that there's so many different, I don't want to say subcultures of it, but there's so many things that people who are followers of Jesus don't agree on.
Oh yeah.
And that if you questioned, you'd have one group of people that would say, no, this is what baptism looks like, or this is what speaking in tongues looks like, or this is what, you know, end times look like. And so when you question it, you're not going to get the same answer. And I think that's what people want that almost like cookie cutter box,
Yeah.
like
Right.
this is the correct answer type thing. And I think there's a lot of room for ambiguity, and I don't know. Like
Right.
Yeah.
he's God and we're not.
But I love that because Tony talked about it a long time ago in one of his sermons. He was talking about, is it a salvation question or a salvation issue? Like our salvation issue should be, I believe it should be set. But all those other things that are not
There's
based on your
secondary
salvation,
issues.
yeah, they're just. I think those are really good to be able to question and be able to have different opinions on, because they make you question it and they make you want to look into it more. They make, like, if we have a disagreement, hopefully that pushes both of us to be able to say, maybe I don't know that all the way. Maybe I need to look into that a little more or study that better. So
Right.
I like it.
Yeah.
So how are you with your kids?
As far as
versus how you grew up feeling?
I have all the right answers. Like
Yeah.
this is it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's like my personality type. Enneagram 8, like Challenger. I need to be proven wrong, and I enjoy it. Like I welcome the debate.
Yeah.
So I have to be aware of that in how I'm presenting the gospel to my kids and presenting like what apprenticeship to Jesus looks like, and this is like our way. And I think that's like my son's 12, and so having the conversation with him, like I don't care about your education. I don't care about what your job is. I don't care about anything else, as long as you know who Jesus is, and you're becoming more like him. Like that's it. And don't even do it my way. Like please don't do it my way, because like I think my way is right, but like I'm doing my best. But find out who he is to you and follow him the best and apprentice him the best way you possibly can. That's all that matters.
One day I was literally just like putting in our baby's room as we were putting shelves up, and she like came in and just like started talking to me, which honestly isn't a whole lot about the Lord. And so I was like, all right, we're going here. This is awesome. So like literally it was like she heard from me about creation, being made in God's image, all the way to Jesus is coming back, and like, do you believe these things? And at that point, I think most people would have said like, you should have sealed the deal, like got on your knees and like led her in the sinner's prayer type of thing. And I didn't. I said to her, I want you to think more about this, and we'll talk more, because I really want you to believe this on you. Not because I said to her, not because mommy and daddy believe this. I want you to believe this.
Yep.
And I don't know, hopefully that'll stick with her. Hopefully be something that she remembers.
Right.
Because I think a lot of testimonies of the Christian's story is
How soon can we get him to say the prayer?
that, and also what you just said of I grew up in a Christian home, and then I decided this was for me. How cool would it be for kids to be like, I decided it was for me. My parents gave me the space to decide it was for me.
Yeah.
And they kept loving Jesus and following him too.
Yeah.
I was just talking to a girl, and she was saying how her dad was a pastor, and he just like was really shoving it onto her, like, you need to do this. And she actually called it like trauma, like used the word trauma many times. And she said they actually sent her to conversion camp. And I'm like, that was the literal name? She's like, yep, it was called conversion camp. And so she went so far, like, I do not want that, just because of how hardly pressed it was. The opposite. She wasn't given the space for believing or not. So now she's like, knows nothing about it. I'm like, all right, do you know like what kind of church was it? What was it? She's like, it was like 7th Avenue. I'm like, 7th Avenue North is a band, I'm pretty sure. Like Seventh Day Adventist. Yeah, that's the one. So far that she'd had nothing to do with it at all, because it was so just crammed down her throat. And I don't know. I'm so glad that I'm not a dad right now, because like that worries me. I'm like, I don't know how to navigate that. And it scares me that I'm going to push one way or be too passive in it. And I don't know how to do that.
Yeah. It's weird. But at the same time, you kind of just have to, like, I think a lot of parents have sort of like a Messiah complex of, I'm going to ensure that my kid is saved. I will save my kid, when they're not our kids, ultimately, So that's freeing and also scary.
I would say that the 4 people I love more than anyone else on the planet are the 4 people I treat the worst. And so, like, if my kids and my wife grow closer to God in spite of the mess that I am, that's a miracle. And so that's where, again, like you talk about trauma and stuff like that, there's definitely issues that I am pressing on my kids that I'm not even aware of.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I even think of my parents. Like, my parents did an amazing job, and I'm very thankful for them. I'm not following Jesus the exact way they are, and it's just a little bit different. And it's no disrespect to them, but it is just like everybody has their messes and their stuff. And how do we, I think it goes really deep into relationship and community with people when our messes actually get close to each other.
Yeah.
I think that's like so big. And like, just to go back to even like your story, I love that there's a mix between our mess and our journey, or our way towards God, or even just our what journey we take in our life, where we go. And I don't know, I'm always open to just test, just to see what do you believe in, why do you believe it. And yeah, it's such a hard answer to, like, that's one thing I do actually worry is, like, if I have kids, like, am I just going to be way too passive? Because, like, growing up, it was just my expectation was just be home. It doesn't matter, be home before dark or whatever, just be home at some point. If you're not home, you're in trouble. And it's like, okay, I don't know. Like, you just have to make it at some point. But yeah, so let's just kind of dig a little bit further, or go a little further in your story.
All right, so it got to 20-something years old, kind of transformational for me, because I was figuring out who Jesus was. So I was baptized in 2003. My cousin and I kind of took a deep dive into...
How old were you at that time?
Early 20s. I don't want to do the math, because
Yeah.
then it's going to show them how much math I don't know how to do. So
And
I
how
was born
old
in
you
19...
are.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't care how old I'm old. All the gray in my beard. So I would say at that age, other things were going on in my life. I was going to a community college after high school and getting my EMT and firefighting certificate and degree in that, which is like a 6-month degree, like, to get the certification. And that was right around the time of 9/11. I remember that because as soon as I got out of EMT school, I couldn't get into fire academy because everybody wanted to go into fire academy at that point. And I was already in... People with their master's degrees were going back to be firefighters. And so I got bumped off the list. I actually had a huge issue. Like, I was like very frustrated with that. I'm like, oh, now everybody wants to be a hero type thing. So it was a bump in the journey. And I feel like it was the first point that God was nudging me away from that. And of course, I'm way too stubborn to just listen to that. And so eventually got my EMT, got my fire certificate, and I couldn't get hired anywhere. And it was everywhere I wanted to go, I was getting shut down. I'd get to like the last interview, and it just felt like it was like everything was great, and then no. So God closed the door on that, and I was doing that for a while. And I think it was right around the time that I was dating my wife, and we ended up getting married. After we got married, we both saved up a bunch of money, and we worked 2 jobs each basically for 9 months. This is one kind of really cool thing that we did is we backpacked around the world. We spent about 9 months doing that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's awesome because she actually went through school really quick, and she had never really done a lot of traveling, and so she wanted to go travel. And I knew that if she went traveling by herself, she'd end up marrying some French dude or something. So I was like, no, like, I'm gonna put a ring on this thing, and you're not going anywhere until. So we ended up backpacking and doing that for a while. And then God kind of spoke to me on our traveling, that I was kind of needed to kind of get rid of that, like, stubbornness of continuing to pursue something that wasn't working out. And the reason I was doing firefighting is one day on, you get 2 days off. And I loved working with teens and working in youth ministry at our church and the young adult ministry and stuff like that. And so I was like, maybe I should go into working with kids. And so what careers do that? And like teaching. So I went back and got my teaching degree when we got back. And then I taught for a couple years in West Palm. And then the next thing where God kind of was a big shaping and transforming my life was leaving the East Coast. That's still really hard for me. That's where my family is. I love surfing. The waves are really good over there. Well, for Florida. And spearfishing is better. The fishing... and it's not inshore as good, but you don't have to go 100 billion miles out to go catch fish. Like, you can kayak off and go do it. So it was really hard for me to leave the East Coast and come over here, but it's what God was calling us to do. We had small kids at the time, and my wife's friends over here that she went to school with, they all had young families as well. So
Nice.
It felt like God was kind of taking me away from firefighting, taking me away from the East Coast, and then to kind of speed up the story, he took me away from teaching at Venice High School, and said, you're supposed to go work with these 2 crazy guys, Caleb Bell and Parker Thurman, and start this thing called the 180 House. And so
Yeah, let's get into that just a little bit later because we just digested a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it was a lot.
No,
so.
one of the things I love that just as you're sharing that just kind of came to my mind. You're talking about like you're trying to do this EMT and firefighter, and you went through the whole program, and it's like, how did you deal with your faith, knowing like God was like saying, you just wasted 6 months of your life training for nothing? Like, how do you feel like when like you try to go for
Thanks
somewhere?
for bringing
and
that
there was
up.
the-
I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
No,
This is kind of a
that-
traumatic
Yeah,
incident
the
for
trauma
me.
for him.
I think it's
Look at the
trauma,
camera.
it brings
Twitching,
up his
yeah.
childhood, right? But like, I love that because I think that's something that like a lot of Christians don't like is like there's a point of failures or there's points of here's a bump and like I don't know like how'd you deal with that like within your faith?
So I remember being that age and really saying, God, what is your plan? God, is what's your will? What's your will? What's your will? And like I was like that was the transformational point for me. Like God, cool. God, I'm gonna follow you. Now just show me what to do. And he's like, nah.
Love
And yeah, and I was like, okay, show me what to do. The reason why I didn't go to a 4-year college is because I didn't want to waste 4 years and not know what I wanted to do. Because I know my personality type, and I have an uncle that's just like me, and he like switched degrees, like switched majors 100 times. I'm like, nope, I'm gonna learn from him.
Yeah.
But I still couldn't avoid it. And so I think that's like, if I could tell my younger self, like, you're not going to be able to avoid what is the saying, James, you know, trials and tribulations that are going to be shaping you and making you stronger. And so it's easy for my personality type to say this, but lean into them.
Yeah.
Like lean into that struggle, that angst, that uncertainty.
Yeah.
There's this secular book.
How dare you,
that
Jonathan,
I-
you're not supposed to bring that up. We're only talking
All
about
right, I'll
Christians
stop.
here. Come on.
Sorry.
sinner.
I honestly forget the name. I feel like the author is Ryan Holiday. I think the title actually is "The Obstacle Is the Way," and he takes from this Stoic philosopher who I can't. It's too early. We're doing this podcast too early.
Yeah.
But anyways, just the title is basically what he's elaborating on throughout the book. Of the obstacle is the way, meaning when you come to an obstacle, it's not just like everything's done. It's like, no, this is the way. The obstacle is the next step that you
Right.
just press through and go on. And I love that sort of mindset of because normally, and it is, I've experienced things like this where it's just crushing.
Yeah.
But to think God has allowed this, he's brought this, I'm charging forward. This is the obstacle's the way.
Have you guys heard that? It was like an old, like it was when I was young. It was this weird song rhyme thing. It was going on a bear hunt. And it doesn't know. They're like going on a bear hunt, something. And then you get to this obstacle, and it was like, oh no, a swamp. Can't go over it. Can't go under it. Gotta go through it. And you kept getting to these like weird obstacles. That's what it made me think.
Yeah.
Must be a Wyoming thing.
Yeah, it's a lot. We don't got bears. I mean,
We
we
don't go bear
have
hunting
swamps
here?
out here. No, that it reminds me of I think it was like Matt Chandler who talks about like the only way through is through. There's no easy way through, and like no. And the reason why I like that kind of part of the NT is because like there was a point in my life where before I was even saved, I was going for this program, you know, to be like working as a surgical tech, you know, working operating rooms, and you know, I was doing pretty well in this school, and I had internships and scholarships for afterwards. You know, as soon as I were to graduate, I have a position. But I was paying that out of pocket, and then this is when we had Hurricane Irma, like 6 years ago or 7 years ago, and that just kind of sucked me and screwed me over financially, and I had to pull out of that program, and I was really disappointed because I was doing good, and I was like, God, like this should have been my calling, and even at that point, I really didn't like God, so that was just another reason for me to hate him, just because of that failure. It's like I was doing good, I had a lot of promise, and then, you know, I look back and I'm thankful because like I realized I couldn't do well in that job. One, because I have a pretty rough knee where I couldn't even stand for very long, so I think like God was like low key trying to help me by like not letting me go through that, and I'm just much more happier where I'm at now than where I could have been. We kind of went over the story starting the 180 house.
Yeah, I'll just touch on like
just
what
a
you
little
guys
quick touch up.
had addressed as well. I think the other thing God was teaching me through that all of those, I'll say, I don't know, like even go like my personality was, let's go through the swamp. Let's keep trying a 10th time to go back to, you know, Jack's Beach Fire Department, and like I'm going to get it this time. My pride, my arrogance is like off the charts. And so that was the first, still is like, that's why, like I struggle with that. that was God's first, like, hey, you kind of have an issue with like surrender and submission. And like, I'm at a point now, like raising my 12-year-old, like we're on this journey. John Tyson has an amazing curriculum called the Primal Path, where raising men that know how to surrender and submit. Because like, if you're anything like me, like you're going to slam your head on that wall like 100 times because you don't have the humility to see actually what God is calling you to do.
Right.
So all I had to say, like, I just wanted to put that in there. But
Yeah. No, I like that. No, that's
huge.
so good.
yeah. So I'll say it, like, I don't think American men know how to surrender and submit, and I think it is a very, very important thing. So all that to say, that's been part of my journey and still is. But yeah, so we did the 180 house. I say did it. I don't know how much people watch this know about it, but it was a teen center that under Youth for Christ. We wanted to create it for a hub for the community, people to come. It's like a coffee shop, surf feel type of vibe, a safe place for people to come, life-giving community. And it took off. It did really well. Not by anything we did. Like, it was 100% like Venice has nothing for young people. And so like you just had to do something, and God just blew it up and went through it. Amazing support through so many different churches, including this one. The community really got behind it, and Youth for Christ planted 2 other 180 houses after that. So one in Sarasota and one in Bradenton.
How long has that been going?
2017 is when I was teaching. So that's when my last year teaching was 2017. So we started it then, and I want to say by 2018 I had gone into full-time ministry. Awesome. So yeah, that was another huge humbling thing. Like, hey, how do you go to your father-in-law and be like, hey, I'm not going to pursue a safer degree or a safer career firefighting. I'm going to go into teaching. Hey, I'm leaving my job teaching, which already is a very nominal salary, to go ask people for money and live off other people's support. So again, God just like wrenching on my pride and my arrogance. Right. And then after 5 years of doing the 180 house, just feeling like, I think someone said the best way to describe it was creative differences between what Youth for Christ saw using it and what we saw using it for. Caleb, one of the founders, had passed away a couple years before, massive heart attack, and we started a nonprofit in his legacy. It's called Caleb Would Go, and the whole point was to empower more people like Caleb. And he was the type of guy who would like listen to a sermon. I want to say like this last Sunday was talking about the girl Nicole in the Middle East. He'd be like, oh yeah, she needs help there, we need to go. And God would speak to his heart like in a crazy way like that, and within a month him and his family would be ready, like, yeah, we're going to go support her and help her in what she's doing. That's awesome. And people would be like, well, how are you on the funding and the fundraising? Well, I don't know, but God told me to go, so we have enough for the plane tickets and to survive a month over there, and that's it. Yeah. And most people, like, we call it irresponsible, and I love it. And so Caleb Would Go, our heart of our nonprofit is to it's not to empower the irresponsible, but we call it the adventurous. But it's to not vet these people where the Spirit has clearly said, hey, you're supposed to go with Jack to Haiti or wherever it is to go help in this area to start something, start a fire, and we want to help you get there.
So with that, how did you know it was, or would he say, how did he know that God's saying, go here? How do you distinguish between, oh, that's a fun idea, and no, God's telling me to do that?
That's between Caleb and God. Like, God's told me to do stuff. Like, he told me, obviously, to leave teaching to go into ministry. And I'd say it's hard to explain that to people. And it's also different because Parker and I, when I was going into full-time ministry, and this is a whole nother thing, Parker, who was working for Youth for Christ, knows how to do fundraising really well, gave me a book called The God Ask. That's like, hey, here's how to like strategize how to do fundraising so that you can do this long term. And Caleb gave me a book by George Mueller, who ran orphanages in Europe, in England. And what George Mueller would do is he wouldn't ask anybody for money. He would just pray, and
millions came in.
Milk trucks would break down in front of the orphanage and be like, hey, we got to get rid of this milk. It just broke down. And that's how he did it. So I had Caleb on one side of my life, like living this radical God faith, like he has to show up life. And then Parker. And so like I say that I'm in between the two of them because I think there's, again, this is multiple ways to follow Jesus. So anyways, all that to say, after about 5 years doing 180 House with Youth for Christ, creative differences, the way they were going, the way I kind of saw it going was different. And it's like, okay, so again, humbling, letting go of something that was there and that's the hard part, is God didn't tell me what was next. Everyone's like, oh, like, what are you going to do now? What thing is going to happen? I don't know. Like, the word he gave me was Jireh, and which is God, my provider. And
Where
that
does
was
that
a
come
huge
from?
one. The Bible.
Do you know what story?
Jehovah Jireh.
Yeah.
I believe it's referenced in multiple stories. I don't know of just one, but yeah, which one
Do
do
you
think?
know?
Yeah.
Isn't that from like when Abraham was sacrificing his son Isaac, and then he's like saying like where's the offering? And Isaac was like, the Lord will provide.
Yeah, I think
Isn't
it
that
is
where
there.
isn't that the first mention of it, at least that I know?
You're so smart.
It's through Psalms as well, I believe. Like, it's a reference to him. But yeah, that's I like that. It's
No,
good.
I
I like
just-
learning.
Yeah, when we kind of throw these terms, I'm like, let's just kind of hit that just so, because I don't know if everyone always knows what it is, and I don't think you'll probably see it written in your Bible in English. Usually, it's like translated from, I think, like into God or Lord.
Yeah.
But sorry, you can go ahead.
No, you're
I
good.
just wanted to hit that.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, please. I spout off stuff that I know it's in there, but I don't know where. So,
Yeah.
Like, again, growing up in the church. So yeah, right now, January is when I left, and it's November now. And so I stepped into a role helping Caleb Would Go get off the ground a little bit more in fundraising and stuff like that. So doing that a little bit. Helping homeschool my kids, which is a huge humbling thing. So my wife she's a therapist, and so she picked up another day of work, which is a huge sacrifice for her. We're building a house, and I'm stupid enough to like try to be the general contractor. Thank God for YouTube. Like, I can YouTube videos and stuff like that, and amazing friends that have been able to support me through that process. But our dream in the house is to use it for ministry. We want to build a place for kids that are aging out of foster care. Underneath, like, there's like, our house is on stilts, so I'll have like a little spot underneath for kids who anybody who basically needs a short-term place to stay.
Yeah.
And then there's another thing I'm doing for house, homeschool, Caleb Would Go. House
Podcast.
No. Oh, handyman work. You guys need any handyman? Yeah. So it's just random.
Yeah.
So like, it's not providing enough money. So that doesn't. And so I don't have, and that's a huge point of contention in. I'm gonna be honest, like in our marriage, like, hey, like, this is really irresponsible for you to be like not doing this, and God's continuing to show up. It's just sometimes we don't know where and how, and but yeah, I do handyman jobs. So if anybody needs any handyman work,
any local
Shout
handyman
out.
exactly. So
work wanted and
so yeah, that's where I'm at now, and I have no clue what's next.
Yeah, but no, that's one of the things I love about like your faith is, and I guess I didn't know you take it on from like Caleb, more specifically, like just how open you are to being like, well, I don't know what the next step is, God, but I'm going somewhere. I don't know where that goes, but yeah, and so just kind of share as far as how. I know you said there's not really a date you thought you were saved, but like how do you view your salvation? How do you view?
That's the one that we joked about that I might view differently. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know when I was saved. And I would say,
would you say there's like for people there's a day of like one day where you're saved, or maybe like you just kind of walk into that?
so this is where it would rock the boat a little bit. I don't think it matters.
Ooh.
Like, I don't think I think the focus, and this is from me.
Yeah.
The focus, and this is where like even the conversation where like I've heard on the prior podcast, the conversation for me growing up was, what was the date of what's your testimony? Like, tell me your journey to get to that point of salvation.
Yeah.
Because of everybody's testimony to getting to the point they were saved, once you get to that point that you are saved, nobody has been talking about the rest of their story. The culture that I grew up in was like, and that's where like I thought it was so cool to have this like, this is where I was, and I was addicted here, and like this was my life, and we talked about that, and now I found Jesus. So my opinion, my Chris Lorenz opinion, is that the conversation should stop talking about like the point of salvation and like talking about more, what does apprenticeship to Jesus look like? If we believe he's alive today, what's your story today? How are you apprenticing to Jesus today? Like, if you were, like, I think of apprentice, like a blacksmith. If you're a blacksmith today, hey, so where are you at in your skill? Can you do like helmets yet? Like, can you make that curve? Or you just like you're like on swords, like banging away on this? Like, and that's cool. No matter where you are, you're a blacksmith.
Yeah.
But like, where are you in the process? And what are you learning? What's the new trick that you've learned? What's the new hack you've learned? And I think that's where Dallas Willard, like you guys have been quoting C.S. Lewis like crazy. I love it. I'm bringing Willard into this, but Dallas Willard talks about a curriculum for Christ-likeness.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not talking more about a curriculum for Christ-likeness? Like, what are the practices that help us apprentice to Jesus more? So I guess that's my, I'm going to push that question back on you guys. And I think you addressed it earlier. And I like this because I went back and listened to it. Did Jesus preach the gospel?
Mm-hmm.
What gospel did Jesus preach?
Mm-hmm.
Because it wasn't about his death.
Wasn't it? Well, I don't want to answer. You answer.
No,
What is
yeah,
it?
I'm asking you.
I don't want
And
to
I think
answer
that's the question. That's the question.
Yeah.
If Jesus came and for 3 years from his ministry
Mhm.
preached the gospel, what gospel did Jesus preach?
Well, I think what I said in the last episode was that he came for the sinners. Like, he came for you, and that he's here now. Like, that was the gospel. That God came down, humbled himself to be with man. I guess that's what I think that's where I landed.
Yeah. I don't have an exact like landing point with the answer, but like often like when it talks about he was preaching, he said, repent for the kingdom is near. And so like there's this, I guess this change of like turning away from where you are and start accepting the coming of the kingdom. And I think I really love how you've put it. You've been practicing it, like kind of like there's like a curriculum you're practicing and you're kind of like taking these steps. Not necessarily, I don't know if you use the word growing, but like that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like you're just like you're not just saved and then done, but like you're, I don't know, like
The words that it was used when I was young in the church was this sanctification process.
Right.
It's kind of like the purity culture. Nobody talks about the sanctification process. It just happens, right?
It's a buzzword.
Right. It just
a lot of
happens.
people say it, but they don't know what it means.
And so that's where I think again Dallas Willard says that like Christ doesn't just grow in you. Like it just doesn't. You doing nothing doesn't allow him to just like grow in you.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to do something. And he talks about, and this is where a lot of people will go back and forth on grace. And I think one of his things he says, grace is not opposed to effort. Grace is opposed to earning.
Right.
You can't earn grace, but you should have an effort. And I think that's where I grew up was, oh cool, we have God's grace. And then we fall somewhere in that whole thing with Paul, like, oh, even though I do what I don't want to do and what I want to do, I don't do. And it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what are you doing about it?
Right.
And it's not what you're doing that is going to save you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's so many different analogies.
Yeah.
Well, my story is similar to yours. Like, I don't know if it was on the podcast now, but I've talked about it a lot. How, like, do you know Tim Hawkins, the comedian?
I've heard of him, yeah.
Okay. In one of them, he's joking about like people's testimonies, and he was like, I wish I was addicted to crack.
Yeah.
So he had
Yeah.
a cooler testimony.
Exactly.
But mine was the same, where I don't know the date of it, but I remember the first time I did the salvation prayer and asked Jesus into my heart. I was 4 years old on my bed with my mom. But then, like you said, I grew up going to Christian camps, Bible camps, all that stuff, and youth group. And every time they did the, hey, everybody bow your head and say the prayer of salvation, I did it again. And
Just in case.
Just in case, yeah. But there were ups and downs and through that. But I feel like I totally agree that after this is the salvation day, there needs to be progress. And that's actually where my heart is for ministry, I believe. I feel like I'm continually going towards that more. But I will like sharpening people. Like I like helping people along, and as iron sharpens iron, so one man shall sharpen another. Just helping you through that process, that growing through it, that there needs to be work put into, like you said, there's got to be effort on your part, which doesn't save you, but there's got to be something, movement in a direction, and I love that. So
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Jonathan opened his Bible, so he has something to say.
No, I was just thinking of a few things. I'm with you. I think the art of following and apprenticing, like you said, under Jesus is lost. And a lot of that is probably owing to like American Christianity and, you're going to make a decision tonight, that sort of thing. But I would also like maybe push back and say there is a time when you are saved. Paul talks about how when you don't see Christ for who he is and his glory, that gospel is veiled to the unbelievers, and Satan is keeping it veiled as best he can.
Right.
But then one day, whenever that is, and all of our stories are different, at one point Paul says, but then God, who said, let there be light, said, let there be light on Chris. Let there be light in Jonathan. And he shines his light into our hearts. And now he goes on to say, now we have this treasure in these broken, dingy clay pots. And so I was also thinking, like, there's a couple of pictures all throughout Scripture that I think make your point of, but also this point of, there is a time when salvation comes to this house, or this is the day of your salvation, that one is babies and one is marriage. Babies as in you are born again. How do you enter into the kingdom of God? Well, you have to be born. Well, so what do? Crawl back up into my mama? Nicodemus said, and he's like, no, this is a spiritual reality where you are reborn. Well, a baby then has to figure things out and be cared for and nurtured and loved and grow up into this new life.
Right.
And that's following Jesus. That's following after him. That's growing into him. That's that sanctification process. But also, like, there was a day when you got married. You don't just hope that you're married. Like,
right.
You either are or you aren't. Kind of like you either are pregnant or you're not pregnant, one or the other. But once you get married, now you get to do the practice of marriage, and you have to follow through and do that. And our vows I took from a sermon from my dad when he was talking about marriage one point. And he said, everyone wants to be president, but nobody wants to do president. And it's kind of the same thing. Everyone wants to be married, but no one wants to do marriage.
Yeah.
And I think the relationship between us and Christ is obviously a marriage. And one day there's going to be a huge wedding feast that we're going to toast each other at.
Yeah.
So, I think you're right on.
For the date, I guess, I don't know if the benefit of having a date, I don't know if that's quite the right word, but I think it's a way that you can battle the enemy and battle your own mind. Like, when you are being tempted with something or being pulled back into things that were pre-salvation, pre that date, like, you can be like, no, on this date, God saved me and he released my soul and broke these chains. Like, you can't pull me back there. This happened. I think that's like a weapon to be able to use.
Yeah.
So for the people that do have like a concrete day, I know this day, because generally those are, I would say, people that had very rough experiences like beforehand, like we talked about being addicted to crack or something.
In a
like
radical
that.
transformation.
Radical transformations. That is a day that they can point to and for their own mental whatever, like the help for that. But for us, it's a little different for me, especially because I didn't have that radical change.
The other side of that, though, is that whole idea of the day or the time you made that decision can be extremely evil, because there's going to be many, Jesus said, who come to me and say, Lord, Lord, didn't I do all of these things in your name? And I do your work. And he's going to be like, I don't even know your middle name. I don't know you. And so I think that there's an evil to that idea of pray this prayer and God has a happy life for you, sort of thing.
From here on out, you live happily ever after.
Yeah, because a lot of people are going to be deceived in that, I think.
Well, so like when I look at that and I think about it, I think like there is some danger to relying on a specific day, but like I think it's such a weapon and tool. Like before Israel crosses the Jordan River in Joshua, all the tribe leaders are commanded to get one stone and take it with you, so that when the next generation asks, you can say, this was the day, that the Lord, took us into the promised land. And like, I even think of Jacob at the end of Joseph's life. Jacob is going to Joseph and he's sharing, the Lord visited me on this day when I was in the wilderness. And like, I don't remember the exact words in the story, but like, he's telling Joseph, like, there was a time where like in my life, the Lord came to me and promised me and visited me. And so like, maybe it's not necessarily something that you should just be like, oh, because I know a lot of people that are like, oh, I was, when I was 6 years old, I prayed, and like they just live a completely different life, but like they come back and say like they had that one day or encounter. But I think there's a mix of that continual growth, but I think there's such a weapon and strength to know like, no, I will remember this day because this is when the Lord came through for me.
Yeah, like I knew that like anytime you say one thing, it's like it could be used back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not against the day.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I grew up in a culture where it was hyper focused on that and nothing else after it. So whether you use that for a weapon against the enemy or not, like again, this is the beauty of the difference in how people are following Jesus. Use it how you're going to use it. What was it? Use it as a tool use it as a tool. It could be used against whatever it's being used as. Be aware of it. I think that to go back to your Nicodemus reference of born again, just looking at our culture, Billy Graham did an amazing job of evangelizing and getting a lot of people to be born again. Our American culture has not done a great job of helping them spiritually develop into better apprentices of Jesus, deeper apprentices of Jesus. So if we're real, we have a lot of spiritual babies that are now in their older years and have lived their whole adult life without this spiritual development because it was never taught.
Right.
If you got at a tent revival and then you never were taught again, like that's like going to like, hey, I'm going to teach everybody how to crack a board with karate. You learn how to crack a board. All right, you know karate, right? So you go around telling everybody you know karate because you can crack one board. Like you don't know the skill and the art. Like why are we not treating following Jesus more like I don't know, what is it called? A dojo or something like that. Like why don't we actually teach it as a train? Like this is where we train.
Yeah.
And like what did Jesus do? And looking at this whole, and I'm sorry, like I'd geek out on this because I'm seeing a culture that is drawing us into nothing.
Right.
You don't have to do anything. Like just fall into the noise. And it's like no. Like if I will, whatever I give my time and attention to is the person I become. So if I made a pie chart of the last week and I looked at my calendar and showed you where I gave my time and attention and where my mind went, for the majority of that time, I definitely was not apprenticing to Jesus. And you guys have heard of the 10,000 hour rule?
Yeah.
So
No, I'm not familiar with
10,000 hours is what it takes to master something. So people who are going to be violinists or whatever it is, like you had to practice for 10,000 hours. So like I actually thought about that the other day, and I was doing the math. Okay, let's say you are a good Christian. You spend 1 hour a day, 1 hour reading your Bible and praying. And then on church, so that's 365. And then if you do the math, it would take over 20 years to actually become a master,
a professional
Christian. And let's be very clear. Go back to the day you are saved, you are born again. But what are we doing after that? And I think that every testimony I've ever heard back in the 90s was what was your life like before? Now you're good because you're saved. And so that's where I think my biggest thing I'm trying to push and get people to talk about is spiritual formation. Can you be saved? And this is the crazy thing to say. Can you be saved without spiritual formation? Because if you're born again and you're new, what new thing is going on? What transformation is happening in your life? So why are we not talking about like what transformation is happening in our lives right now today? If Jesus lives it, what's transformation is happening? And then it goes into the spiritual disciplines, in my opinion. Like what did Jesus do? Jesus was with tons of people in community, and then he was in silence and solitude. In our culture, we do not practice silence and solitude. Jesus said, when you Sabbath. When, not if. When you Sabbath. When you fast. Not if you fast, when you fast, when you pray.
I think it goes to like back to the idea of the gospel, because the gospel isn't just this, here's your ticket, make sure you don't lose it, it'll get you to the nice place, not the bad place. But I also think about right away, because who knows, maybe someone will be listening to this who's in hospice. And I always think about the guy hanging there next to Christ, because the guy lived like hell and he had no spiritual formation. And Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise. And that's the gospel.
But what if he did have spiritual formation and it started right there? You have to start to be a blacksmith at one
Totally.
point.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It doesn't. That's the beauty. Is like if you are a blacksmith, you are a blacksmith.
Right.
And I think of any other art. If you know karate, you know karate.
Well, you're an apple tree if you're an apple tree.
Correct.
You're going to bear the fruit.
Yes. And so as soon as you are, you are. And I think everyone's like, well, you don't have, it doesn't matter about this. It's like, stop focusing on this one point of whether you actually decided to be a blacksmith or not, and start actually go banging the metal.
Yeah.
So what is the banging the metal part? And I think that's the conversation that I'm trying to invite other people into, because I want it in my life. And then it does border with legalism. That's where you have to make sure that you are using silence and solitude and Sabbath and fasting and prayer as a tool to posture your life for God to show up and do radical transformation. It is not those things that do anything for you, but it is a posturing your time and your attention to apprentice to the master.
That's good.
I love that. I think that's something, oh man, I would love to even go more into that. Like, just what does that apprenticeship look like? What does that,
Practicetheway.org.
Chris, tell us what you mean when you say people follow Jesus in different ways.
His whole list, sorry, I don't know if I can say this, but there's a whole list of things that would be great to talk in this podcast. How do people feel about the Enneagram?
Okay, I see.
How do people feel about Calvinism, about end times, about baptism, about speaking in tongues? We can discuss and argue about that all day. I feel like if Jesus, I used to have this whole thing of, it's not all these different paths lead to heaven. But what if Jesus was on the top of the mountain and people are just getting to Jesus through different paths to still get to Jesus, but they're coming from a Catholic background. They're coming from a Protestant or a, what's the word I'm looking for?
Reformed?
Reformed is one.
Or Baptist or whatever.
The one that I'm not great at, speaking in tongues, what would that be?
Charismatic?
Charismatic. From I love. Those are the two. Like, I'm Presbyterian. It's like that's how I grew up.
Yeah, you baptize babies and
yes,
stuff.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But like, I want to hear more about these. And I think you talked about one of the first things, these habits, these traditions. Dude, I've been practicing Lectio Divina, which is like this whole thing of like having scripture just read over you, and some of like the Catholic prayers that are preset prayers. It used to be like, I don't want to do a preset prayer. Like, oh wow, let me hear the history of why they do this and practice some of these things that are like retreat even, and enjoy that. And then also some of the charismatic as well. Like, let's enjoy the difference in the body rather than being like, oh, I don't know, that's a little weird for me.
That's not how you follow Jesus. Yeah.
That's not it. My way is it type thing. Rather than appreciate the differences or wasting time talking about why your way, what are the verses that line up from your way, because they have the same amount of verses that line up for their way. So let's use it as a tool to connect with God and then appreciate the different ways that the beauty of the body is made differently to follow Jesus and surrender and submit to King Jesus our Lord. Alive today, not died and now we get to go to heaven, but alive today and we get to be with him and bring his kingdom into this world today.
That's good.
It just reminds me, like just at one point where it talks about like God upholds his servants, like in their own unique way. So like don't think like, hey, this guy's doing it this way, he's doing it wrong, I'm doing it the right way. And so but that goes into where there's probably a primary issue and there's the secondary. So
salvation issue.
Yeah, I think that's something we can discuss later. But yeah, so thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Chris.
jumping on with
Thanks
us,
for having
Chris.
me.
I think this was a pretty good discussion. I think this was honestly, I was not kind of expecting this, and I feel like I gotta like check myself now. Like I gotta evaluate my life. So it's been good. It's been fruitful. Thank you so much, guys, for jumping in with us and tuning in our episode. You guys, I mean, it's morning time. It's time we get up and get ready for work, but you guys can enjoy your day. Take care.